when he sent an email on behalf of the Wasli board. It made me stop and think. Normally I'm very responsive to emails, but I had to take a moment, take some time to think about whether to accept this presentation because I was so honoured to have been asked. And I duly accepted. I'm very proud to be here with you all today at this World Association of Sign Language Interpreters Conference, because I have had the utmost respect for Liz Scott-Gibson and her work as the Wasli president. She saw the organisation born, she's seen it grow, and now she moves on. But I also welcome the new Wasli president, Deborah Russell, and look forward to seeing your work over the next 4 years. I would also like to acknowledge my colleague, Markku Jokinen, the current president of the World Federation of the Deaf. We've worked closely together for the last 8 years, and I'm sad to see that he will be stepping down from his role at the next WFD General Assembly next week. I would like to thank you for your work, Marco, over the last 8 years. And Bruno. Bruno has been my friend for perhaps 25 years. And we originally met through the National Theatre of the Deaf in the United States. Originally, I worked as an actor in the Deaf Theatre. And while I was involved in the National Theatre of the Deaf, we did a tour throughout South Africa. And I met Bruno during that tour and recommended him to the Theatre of the Deaf in America. So I have many fond memories of my time of knowing Bruno. I'm also delighted to see all of you here, interpreters from throughout the world, here with us here today. And I'm particularly proud to say that my daughter, my baby daughter, is here as a sign language interpreter. She qualified as a British Sign Language interpreter last week, and I'm very proud of her. Tara, where are you? Congratulations. The theme of my presentation today directly links to the theme of your conference. Think globally, act locally. And we have to think about how we can do that. And I hope to explain some of my thoughts about how we can do that through my presentation today. There are 2 themes, if you like, that I will present to you today. Markku has already mentioned the Convention on the Rights of People with Persons with Disabilities, and I won't let him steal my thunder because I will talk in more detail, but as he said, it's an incredibly important document for deaf people. And I will talk about that convention in more detail. So why is this convention such an important piece of legislation for us in the deaf community? Many people that have disabilities are not achieving full access to human rights. We know that over many years there has typically been a very medical model of deafness, and no view of the deaf person as a person, but there has been a paradigm shift. And now the human rights of people, whether they're deaf or have other disabilities, is important to consider. There are various conventions which deal with the human rights of different populations, women, and so on. But none of these conventions have really applied adequately to the needs of people with disabilities. So the CRPD, the Convention for the Rights of People with Disabilities, finally directly addresses the human rights of people with disabilities. So the governments of various countries are now able to refer to this convention to ensure the equality of people with disabilities and their human rights throughout the world. Everyone hear me okay? Everyone understand me signing okay? Not too fast? Okay. I'd like to give you some information about the process that led towards the ratification of the CRPD. The United Nations, in its General Assembly, received a motion from a delegate from Mexico that a convention should be developed to address the human rights of people with disabilities. The General Assembly then decided to establish a series of ad hoc sessions over 4 years, from 2002 to 2006. And 8 ad hoc sessions took place over that 4-year period. Some of you may have seen me present on this topic before, but for some of you this information might be new. The sessions did not just last for 1 day, it didn't last for a year either. They would take often 2 to 3 weeks per session. And they would last from morning till night, every single day. So everybody worked tirelessly to discuss these issues. Now, 70 million deaf people throughout the world had to be represented during these ad hoc sessions. Dr. Lisa Kauppanen, former president of the World Federation of the Deaf, who is herself is from Finland, and Carol Lee Aqualine, the former General Secretary of the World Federation of the Deaf, and Markku Jokinen were the 3 representatives for the worldwide deaf community. Lisa, as many of you know, has been advocating for the rights of the deaf community for many years and continues to do so, and has very little spare time because of her commitment to her work. During these sessions, the representatives of the World Federation of the Deaf met with various representatives to promote the rights and needs of deaf people throughout the world and their needs for their human rights, primarily in relation to the use of sign language. Markku mentioned the fact that there are countries who have ratified the convention and those who are signatories. Those who are signatories are those countries that have given a commitment to recognise the needs of deaf people or people with disabilities in their policies and in their laws. Those countries that have ratified the convention are those that have given a commitment to work towards making changes in their legislation as soon as possible. May 2008 is the date that the convention was ratified by 20 different countries. Once it had been ratified by 20 different countries, the convention came into being. As of the 8th of July 2011, there are 149 signatories to the convention. You may be wondering whether your own country is a signatory or if they have ratified the convention. And it's possible to find that information through the UN website, and it's important to see how many of those have actually ratified the convention. To date, 102 countries have actually ratified the convention. As Marku mentioned earlier on, there are 5 articles throughout the convention, and in 8 of those articles, sign language is mentioned. I don't have the time here today to talk about these articles in detail, but I will talk about 2 articles that are most relevant to you as sign language interpreters. But I do ask that those of you who are professional sign language interpreters, you need to understand the importance of the convention and its application to your work as sign language interpreters, its application to the lives of deaf people, and how you can work with deaf people. Article 2 gives a definition of disability. Article 9 discusses accessibility. Article 21 discusses freedom of expression and opinion and access to information. Article 24 discusses education. And Article 30 highlights the participation in cultural life, recreation, leisure and sport. Now, throughout these articles, the words sign language are recognised and mentioned 8 different times. As we know, historically, sign language has had very few mentions in any international legislation. This is the first document of its kind ever to be produced by the UN that has such attention given to sign language. Moving on from the CRPD, I'd like to focus now on a global project that I was involved in and that Zane mentioned in his introduction. The project idea was conceived by the Swedish Deaf Association, who approached the World Federation of the Deaf and suggested that a project was needed to look at the lives of deaf people worldwide. A Swedish organisation provided funding for the project, and this organisation typically funds projects in relation to people with disabilities living in developing countries. I just need some water because I'm talking too much. Now, the goal of this global project was to collect information about the lives of deaf people in various countries. And we collected this information through a survey instrument, which was translated from English into Spanish and Russian, and was also provided in international sign, so that we could make sure that deaf people throughout the world could access the questions in this survey. We wanted to ensure that we collected information from deaf people in developing countries. We didn't want only to collect information from people in westernised countries, from the United States, from Europe. As we know, there are many deaf children that receive very little or no education in many developing countries, and many of them have little or no literacy skills.
We also know that in many countries, sign language, the use of sign language is forbidden and is repressed. And this is often made worse by the educational situation. We also know that in many developing countries, deaf people are not aware of the rights that they have. They're a marginalised group and they have no idea of their human rights. During the project, we collected information from 7 different regions throughout the world. The first was Mexico, Central America. Next was South America. The East and South of Africa. Western and Central Africa. The Arab nations. The former Soviet Union, Russia, Transcaucasia, and so on. The Asia Pacific. These regions provided information which was then collated into 7 different reports, one for each region, and I was responsible for authoring each of those reports. These reports were able to provide us with very valuable and up-to-date information, the most up-to-date information that we had collected in 20 years. The information contained within each report was then summarised into one document. The person that worked primarily on this document was Dr. Hilda Hauerland from Norway. She brought all of this information together in one document with my support. And I would like to give you a summary now of what we found during this project and how what we found has a direct impact on the human rights of deaf people throughout the world. To summarise the process, we distributed the survey throughout the world and we distributed the survey to over 130 different countries. My eyesight's not good, and we received responses from 68 different countries who are members of the World Federation of the Deaf. We also received responses from 25 countries who are not members of the World Federation of the Deaf, giving a total of 93 different countries that we received information from through the survey. Hilda and I, in surveying these different countries and looking at the information that we received, wanted to conceptualise the basic factors for human rights for deaf people, and we came up with 4 different overlapping quadrants. The first core aspect of human rights for deaf people is sign language, the use of a signed language. That's at the heart of human rights for deaf people. Overlapping with that is the need for a bilingual education in both a signed and a written language, so that children can be exposed bilingually throughout their education. Directly linked with those rights is the need to access information through sign language interpreters, and the need to have professionally trained sign language interpreters to enable deaf people throughout their lives to access services. So these 4 quadrants, overlapping quadrants, are the most basic factors that we identified. And professional sign language interpreters are an important part of the human rights for deaf people and a central point of one of those basic factors. I'd like to talk now about the status of sign languages as recognised through our survey. To give you some context, first of all, I will refer to Article 2 of the Convention, which gives a definition and 5 sub-definitions. Now, in the UN Convention, they give a very clear definition of language. And the definition of language includes spoken and signed languages. So what does that mean for us? This is a critical point for us to note, that the United Nations recognises signed languages on a par with spoken languages. And I'd like Marku in particular to reflect on our experience when we went with Lisa Kauppanen to these ad hoc sessions. And there was one country that fought to have the words signed language removed from the definition of language within the convention. And Lisa Kauppanen, this miracle worker, told Marku and I to calm down, and she approached the government delegate from that country, and Marku and I sat back and watched, anticipating what she was doing, and Lisa gave us the tiniest wink to confirm that things were going to be okay. She returned to where we were sitting. All of the delegates came back to the meeting. And as we began to discuss the vote for the removal of the word sign languages from the convention, the delegate from the country who made the proposal said, "I've spoken to the president of the World Federation of the Deaf, and I now understand how important it is to recognise signed languages. So we would like to withdraw our proposal, and we would like to keep the words signed languages in the convention." Hold on, don't celebrate too soon. We still had to wait for the vote. Marku, do you remember how many countries were there? There were many, many countries there. Over 100 different countries were represented. And 100, every single country voted to include the words signed languages in the CRPD. And it brought a tear to all of our eyes. It was a very emotional moment for all of us, and I'm sure that you can appreciate how momentous that moment was.